spot, which Tony was talking about, in the episode before the last episode, he was like, I wonder if you know if it happens or not when you get shot. The whole point of that is the unknown. It is rather hopeful than negative. A lot of people say that The Sopranos is merely negative. However, after years of feeling unsatisfied and dependent, Carmela finally seeks spiritual answers and independence. After AJ deals with depression, he finally seeks out a better path, and Meadow chooses a career of law and idealism. So this whole thing shows that cycles can be broken, however, not for everybody. And the whole point of this is that Tony's whole entire family, they broke a cycle. They broke the cycle of getting out of their bad relationships, of constantly being in the same habits that they've always had, even though they know that they're bad. They got out of those terrible, toxic mindsets. However, the one person that is seen to be the most powerful throughout the show was the one who couldn't get to that point, and that was Tony. He watched his whole family thrive. However, at the end, he was still the one who was still cheating on his wife and still acting through disloyalty towards not only his family, but also his friends and everybody that he claims to love. Moral clarity without preaching. That's another huge symbolic portion of the show. The Sopranos rather exposes evil than excusing it. When you look at the actions that the crime, uncles and brothers go through in this show, they could say that they're glorifying these actions of killing, doing drugs, sexual situations that may not be loyal to their partners. However, it shows ultimately the consequences of doing these things, and that's the whole point of the show. They're not glorifying it. The characters in the show glorify it themselves. However, the audience see the consequences that happen from these actions. And at the end of the day, we see, the terrible things that can happen if you treat other people terribly or you are disloyal to your family. And even if nothing physical actually happened to these people as a consequence, they still feel so bad about themselves inside. And that's kind of the worst torture you could go through, I feel. Tony remains charismatic throughout most of the show. However, his actions begin hollowing him out. So he begins the show out with a great sense of humor. He's very, happy-go-lucky. However, as the show goes on, his actions start to show him that maybe he's not so powerful deep within. Maybe he's not so, maybe he shouldn't be so prideful. And it causes his happiness and his charisma to kind of decline over time. And the tragedy of the whole show is the fact that Tony failed to change. The Sopranos causes the audience to reflect on their own choices, denials, and justification. This is literally the biggest point that I want to get across in this presentation is, the whole entire tragedy of the show is that Tony failed to change. The whole entire time you're sitting there watching the show, you are yelling at Tony saying, just stop doing these things. Stop making these decisions. Stop treating people like this. However, even though he is so unhappy with himself and he's so unsatisfied with his life, even though on paper he has everything he could ever want, he has the money, he has the beautiful large house, he has the beautiful wife who loves him through everything that he does to her, he has 2 loving children, a son and a daughter. Who would not want to have that life? However, deep down, Tony is just so unhappy with himself, and that's the whole tragedy because he never changes. After watching the show, I can confidently say myself, I have watched this show multiple times through, and every single time I end it, and even throughout the course of the show while I'm watching it, I ask myself, would I do that? Or do people really change? It really causes the audience to question moral compass, values, spiritually, the spiritual side of things, and not in a necessarily bad way. It's questions that humans need to ask. I feel like The Sopranos really challenges the human mind and ultimately what we think is good or bad. This show still matters today. So this show, as I said, this show causes people to become self-aware. It causes people to ask themselves, can people really change? And it is philosophical just through a fictional show. The characters that they used in the show and the whole plot that they used was absolutely perfect